Hey, good morning and welcome back to Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood. I know that you're probably thinking, oh no, more Ford stuff. Well, you're wrong. Today we're actually working on some Buick stuff. This was originally Project Boat Anchor, which was just a 350 small block Buick that was essentially found in an abandoned Connex box. And it was a short block. And what we've done is gone through and reassembled the engine. We disassembled it, cleaned it all up really good. It was rusted pretty bad. That's why it got the name Boat Anchor. And reassembled. And now the rings are gapped for boost. And the plan was to put a single turbo on the on this 350 Buick. If the Grand National, which had the 3.8 liter Buick, which is a variant of this engine family, if it ran pretty good, then this would have to run gooder. So it would be a grander National in this case. But just to give you a quick rundown on everything that's here that we've already done, we cleaned up the short block. It is 40 over 350 Buick, making it 357 cubic inches. It has factory cast pistons in it, the factory rods, just standard off-the-shelf rings and bearings set up for it. It has TA dual groove bearings in the front. There's none of the oiling mods done to it with the exception of the pickup passage has been opened up to a 1/2 inch instead of 7/16. So I wanted to leave the engine as much as stock as possible because the way I'm looking at it is there's a lot of folks out there with Buick 350s and there's very few performance parts available for them. And when you do throw parts at them, they don't really... There's not a lot of stuff out there that can really gain you a lot for the amount of money that you spend. But in this case, the whole idea was to have a stock short block with EFI. This one has a TA, a 350 Buick intake manifold on it, but it's been modified for EFI. And then I have an elbow from Edelbrock that I don't know if they're even available anymore. Part number 3849. And then an LS throttle body on it. That's it. And I have a cheapo 4-bolt flange to 3-bolt adapter, which you could actually just have a 4-bolt LS throttle body on here. If I could find one for a reasonable price, this one was 15 bucks at the junkyard, so that's what I'm going with. Other than that, it's got some 42 pound-per-hour injectors out of a Ford Lightning. You cannot even buy these anymore, so I've had it for a while, if you can tell. The intake manifold I had done in like 2009, so it's been a while. I've had this on a couple of engines, and I just never got to it because it ended up getting taken off. Somebody wanted to buy the engine without the EFI setup. So now we're going to do something a little bit elaborate with the parts that I have. Again, like I said, stock short block, so it's just a stock replacement timing chain. The camshaft is a 69 Buick 350, which is considerably better than the camshaft that you would have found in like a later 70s model emissions friendly. The heads are 71 model cylinder heads. They have stock valves. They got a little bit stronger spring due to, we're going to put some boost to this thing. So those 12 pounds of boost that you're adding in, you have to have a spring a little bit stronger so that it can actually pull the valve shut with all the boost on it. Other than that, it's pretty much as factory was. Now, the intake manifold is bolted on. The valve covers are already done. It just has a stock set of rockers. It has the stamped steel rockers, which are considerably stronger than the earlier model aluminum ones that seem to have like a 71 model aluminum one, which was their cast aluminum. There's nothing extravagant done to them. I just wanted the stamped steel rockers because they're actually stronger. They have a better ratio and they don't wear the shaft as bad as the early model ones. Other than that, I think, so today we're going to get to, I'm going to bolt the timing cover on if possible. I'd like to get the oil pan on, but we're going to have to modify the oil pan for a return, oil return from the turbo. So here's a cheapie right from Amazon bulkhead fitting for a 10AN return for a turbo. It just comes with a nut and then 2 rubber washers that you sandwich in the oil pan. Now, it may be better just to weld this thing in. I'm going to try it just like anyone else would. If you were doing this on the low buck and you didn't have a welder, you know, I'm sure you're going to end up, I'm going to have a welder just to fabricate the exhaust manifold I need here. But if you look over on the driver's side here, I'm using exhaust manifold. And if you remember, the Buick 350 has an exhaust manifold that generally went to a Y pipe that went underneath the cutout in the oil pan to meet over here on the passenger side. Well, this is an ideal situation because I can literally cut that off at the Y and bring it right up to this side and have myself a simple log style header or manifold, whatever you want to call it. This is just a header flange available from TA. And I'm just going to put it together as simply as I possibly can with the stuff that I have, just like a regular person would. But the idea was to get just a stock 350 Buick, just like anybody else would have, with the exception of the rings have been gapped for boost. There's nothing magic about this thing. It has a new set of lifters, and we're doing I opened up all the oil passages to 1/2 inch, not just in the block, but also in the timing cover. So that way we know it gets plenty of oil. I am going to use a stock pan, which I kicked around for a long time. Did I want to modify the pan? Did I want to add extra quart? No, I don't, because if you're doing this at home and you have just a stock 350 Buick and you bolted this intake manifold on, this is how you would do it. You would leave it in the engine, or the engine in the car, and then you would modify your stuff as it's necessary. Taking the pan off and adding your oil drain back would be about the biggest complicated thing that there is. And we're going to see if we can make it work. Now, it is designed to run on Holley EFI, so we're going to purchase the parts necessary for making a complete fuel injection system that runs off of Holley EFI. The idea behind that was I could use a Hyperspark distributor and set it all up, and it's Holley's distributor with the Holley EFI. There's wiring harnesses available, so it'll literally be a plug and play kind of option for this setup. Now, we'll work off of Hall Effect, and it'll give us a little bit of adjustability with the computer, because that's what I wanted, was to make it sequential, and I wanted the computer to control the timing based on boost. That's the important thing. And so that's where we're at today. So we're going to modify the oil pan for this drain back, and we're going to hopefully get the timing cover, everything assembled. I am waiting on the booster plate because a long time ago, well, not a long time ago, just a few years ago, I realized the small block Buick, you never rebuild the timing cover without a high volume pump and a booster plate. That's just where they're at, because the gears are so small, it cannot run and it cannot push enough oil to all the bearings and be efficient at it. It's better just to add the taller gears from the high volume pump, open up some of the passages, eliminate some of the restriction, and then hopefully have something that has decent oil pressure at idle, and it remains that way for a long, long time. So we're going to get after it. So first thing we're going to do, weld this fitting, or not weld it in, we're going to drill and then install this fitting in the oil pan. So if you know me, I like to put all my parts on a table, and then as you're assembling it, hopefully there's nothing left on the table when you're done. I have actually screwed that up a couple of times, and I ended up leaving the oil slinger off, the crankshaft there, on the table, and it's the last thing on here, and I'll lift up a box or something like that white lid, and then there'll be the oil slinger, and I'm like, good Lord, so you end up having to disassemble a bunch of stuff. But luckily we have the oil slinger on today, and here's our pan, and I'm trying to figure out where to put this oil drain back fitting, and now looking at it, see, if I put the fitting in the incorrect spot, like say I had to put it here, okay, it'd make it difficult for me to get the oil pan bolt in here. So I think the best thing to do is just move it back to this position, put it up as high as possible so oil doesn't fill the whole thing, and it literally just runs out as necessary with no restriction. The last thing you want is oil to back up in your drain back tube, because then it'll start blowing the seals out of the turbo, and it'll start smoking like mad, and then it'll need a rebuild. So what we're going to do is we're going to install it fairly high here, close to the pan rail, but in between the bolts, so that you can get the bolts in when putting the pan on, when you install the pan. Here is the turbo. It's a GT45. It's a borrowed turbo. It's not mine. I actually kind of stumbled on this. Dr. Art from Hot Rod Rehab, he had this laying around, and it's just a cheapy Chinese M turbo. it'll probably melt down, I don't know, in considerable less amount of time than a really nice, like a GT45 is a copy of a Garrett 45 turbo. And so we'll see how it goes. I know this thing is going to be plenty healthy. The reason why I didn't do it, originally I was going to do an HX35 turbo. The only reason I didn't do that is because the power would have came on way too soon, like 1800, 2000 RPM. There's nothing wrong with that, but the problem is with the Buick 350, it already has enough cylinder pressure to have detonation issues under light load in high gear. And so I wanted something that would come on a little bit later, and it would actually feed it up through the power band up to about 5,000 RPM. That's where your stock engines, they seem to work. The Buick 350 seems to like 5200 as a red line. So this will be kind of perfect for it. The rest of the stuff here, you've seen a zillion times. Just gasket sets and pickups and water pump and all that jazz. There's the timing cover. I've already got it done. Like I said, I'm just waiting on a booster plate. Over here is your oil filter adapter. I had to take two and make one. One thing I did find on the small block Buicks is the bypass spring, and for the oil filter, it's actually located in the bottom, is relatively light. So any of the 300, 231 and all that stuff, what I did was I knocked the plug out from the top. I pushed the plug backwards, disassembled it, put a spring in there for a 455, and now it's considerably stronger than it was before. And then I opened up the passages in there, a considerable amount to 1/2 inch, so that we weren't missing anything. And it's just on the painting table, so that's it. I just got to put a couple more coats on it. Let's see here. Okay, some things that I've done since we put this thing on the back burner. Okay, so I got this is right here. This is your map sensor, and it uses an early style GM map sensor. And this is a 3-bar map sensor, so that means it's actually capable of going up to, like, say 45 pounds of boost or something. When you do a map sensor that's like say more than 1 bar, which is a standard map sensor that works off a vacuum essentially, the clarity goes away when you go to a 2 or 3 bar map sensor. Okay, so it's not as accurate. So it's not as happy, but still it's going to give us the opportunity to adjust for boost. And it didn't do that on a 1 bar map sensor. It won't do it really. You need to have a minimum of a 2 bar if you're doing a turbo application. This is the air charge temperature sensor, and it's just drilled and threaded into a 1-inch spacer plate. Okay, then you have the engine coolant temperature sensor here, and it's just installed in this bung. Now I'll probably end up filling these 2 bungs here with just some, maybe just some plugs, some pipe plugs. But hopefully everything seems to fit and I have enough room for just about anything I want to do on it. All right, so nothing crazy exotic. The most expensive thing I think on this elbow setup is the elbow itself. It was about $200 a long time ago. I don't even know what they are today. This adapter was like $40, so it's not much. Now the most expensive thing on the lower intake manifold is by far the lower intake manifold, because it was probably $400 for the intake manifold, and then another $800 to $1,000 to have the bungs welded in and the fuel rails made for it. So other than that though, stock 1970s something Buick 350. I think it's like a 73 short block and then 71 heads. Okay, so before we mount this timing cover and the gasket on the block, since we've done a few oil modifications to the timing cover, the oil suction side and the oil feed side, the holes are generally a little bit smaller than what you've opened them up to. So what you need to do is you need to open these 2 holes up, and there's only 2 ways to do it. One, you can mount this on the block and then tap around it with either your screwdriver handle, or I like to use a ball peen hammer in this case. You don't whack it, you just freaking crush the gasket and it'll cut it out using the same shape in the block. Or you can put it on the timing cover and do the same thing. but I found that the cast iron on the block likes to cut a lot better than the aluminum on the timing cover. All right, so that's what we're gonna do next. And that way, you know, at least the minimum restriction is going to be the block and not the gasket. The gasket, after you do all the work and you don't open these holes up, guess what? There's no point in even doing any of the work. So the gasket needs to match at least the smallest diameter piece, which in this case is the block. The timing cover is all at a 1/2 inch as well, but I'm thinking that the block is probably going to be just fine.
5 minutes later.
So now you can see the difference of which you have cut that out. Okay, you would have had a big restriction difference had you not opened those up. All right, so in this one, I know they look like a boogered bag of butt, but check it out. Now it's cut to the same size hole, exactly what you want, okay? Now it's still gonna seal just fine, even though you've smashed it down quite a bit around that hole, because remember, on that hole, there was no sealing surface on the other side, right? So now you have much less of a restriction on your oil pickup and in feed side to the block. All right, this is just as important as all the oiling mods. There you go. She's done. All right, so those bolts torque at 20 foot-pounds. The small ones, the 1/4 inch, and the water pump are at 10. So I just do them at 20, hold it in place, it'll tighten up, or it'll dry up, and then it should seal really well. Now, since we're doing EFI on this one, we're not going to put a mechanical fuel pump on it, so we're just going to block it off. This is just an aftermarket chrome piece, match my valve covers, but these were available. You could actually get an electric fuel pump in a Riviera, and they had factory Buick fuel pump block-off plates from the factory. So look around a few Rivieras, you can find them. And this one doesn't fit. Go figure. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, I'm slipping the pan on, and this is what I run into. I was checking to see what my depth here on my pickup was, and it's still considerably a little bit too far, so I'm going to bring the pickup up some. I'm going to bend it up, but this is the other thing I ran into. I dropped the pan on here trying to check my clearance, and I noticed, wow, what the heck? My bolt holes aren't lining up like I wanted. So, I'll show you why. Okay, this is how you get the cart before the horse. Okay, you see how the holes are just off a little bit? They're like literally 1/8 of an inch off. Okay, the drain back, I put it in the exact same spot as the pickup just by dumb luck. And it was stupid of me to not realize that to begin with. But yeah, so now we're gonna have to clearance the drain back tube somehow on the inside to give it enough room for the pickup and to slide the pan over 1/8 of an inch. It's literally got to go over just a hair. So hopefully we can figure something out. So here's what I've got going on here. I don't know if you can see it. I'll pull it up there so you can. Okay, that's the area which it's hitting, and it's tightened down as best as possible. So worst case scenario, I grind down 1/8 of an inch on these pieces, still threads, get it on there, be happy about it, and then there's clearance and the world is fine. If not, I'll remove the nut, I'll remove the washers, and I will weld this fitting to the pan. And then I will grind down the excess here so it's not sticking out virtually past the pan itself. So we'll see what I can do. That may be the best option so I don't get a leak. It's been a couple of days since I've given you an update or shown you what's going on with this oil pan. That was one of the last things I had to complete for this turbocharged 350 Buick motor at this point until I order some parts and get the hot side, start fabricating the hot side and working on how I'm going to do the oil pump and all that stuff, or actually the oil feed line for the turbo. And but I did have I had the return completed, and I thought in the last video I had got it all right, everything was perfect, and it just so happens that where I drilled and put the return fitting just so happens to be right where we're fighting for the same space with the oil pickup tube. 360 degrees on the pan, and I picked the exact spot that the pickup tube is. And that's just irony to find. So I'll flip the camera around. I'll show you what we ended up doing and how I did it and why. But here's how that turned out. Okay, so here's the oil pan completed. And there's our pickup or our return line for the oil drain back. You know, like I had said in the previous video, man, I want to install it right in between these two bolts so it's easy to install the pan. And it just so happens I picked, and since the turbo's on this side, I was planning on putting it on this side here and on this front part of the head. Dang it, if I didn't drill this, and the pickup is right behind it. So it had a big nut and two little rubber crush washers on it. And so what I ended up doing was this. I ended up welding it on both sides of the pan. Okay. And then I ground it smooth and flat. And then wherever the weld was at, I ended up putting some RTV around it. And to ensure that the RTV was going to adhere to this pan well and not end up in the pickup tube or down in the sump here, I sandblasted this area to rough it up, give it some teeth. And then I put some RTV around here. It shouldn't be anything impacting it since there's nothing's going to be that close to the pan. And it should stay there for a really long time. But I did this just for the sole purpose of pretty much making sure there wasn't a leak. It's hard to test. I capped it, filled it with water before I painted it to ensure that there was nothing going to leak out of it. But this is just for the safety's sake. Hopefully it'll be fine. A majority of the gaskets end up with RTV on them anyway, and most of it doesn't end up in the pan somehow. So we'll just see how this goes. But the pan is the last thing that I have to put on here. And so I ended up having to sandblast and paint the whole dang pan again, just because when I welded that in, it boogered it all up and it looked like crap, and I didn't want to have that. So, and then I finally got the pan on and I realized I didn't have any bolts ready. So talk about preparedness and foresight and focus. That's not me these days. And here's our bolts. So we're going to go ahead and screw these bolts on. And we're going to get this pan on, and the motor's going to be pretty much done until my booster plate comes in and I start getting some tubes for my hot side. There's the two rubber washers that went on either side of that fitting, but no longer needed. It's now held into place with some steel. So I'll see you later.
Blah, 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 blah.